The number one team in the country continues to roll. Let's talk about women's hockey.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. Really do appreciate every single person tuning into this. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for helping build this community. We got a great guest coming back on for the second time, Grace Canunzo, student at Wisconsin, journalist student, writes for the Daily Cardinal. Grace, thank you for jumping back on. Let's talk women's hockey. Let's start here. Number one team in the country continues to roll along. They played it like it all year, 11-1-2 against teams ranked in the top 15. What's the last couple of weeks been like for this women's hockey team?
Yeah, so at the end of last week, they played St. Cloud State. It was an interesting series because the first game they won at 5-2. Felt pretty dominant too. If I wasn't looking at the score, I would have guessed they won by a larger margin than that. And it marked the 19th game in the season that they have scored 5 or more goals in a game. So they looked excellent. 5 goals, I should mention, also by 5 different goal scorers. So the second game seemed vastly different. It seemed like a different team than I'm used to seeing. It was much slower. Lacey Eden's goal, though, did bring her up to 150 career points. The game ended in a tie. Wisconsin came away with a point, and they used the tiebreaker point like they did win the shootout. So that will be good down the line if it comes down to it, although Wisconsin is doing so well that you reason it might not really matter at all. But also shout out to Ava McNaughton because St. Cloud State didn't score at all in the shootout. So Wisconsin won that one. And something else interesting is that Wisconsin was like a clean 12-0-0 at home in LeBon. Now 12-0-1, which don't get me wrong, that is not too shabby at all. But they also have outscored opponents 156-31 at home this season. In the 7 goals in the series, there were 6 goal scorers, which seriously speaks to the depth of this team, and they have 3 series left in the regular season.
Well, that's one of the things we've talked about a lot. Coming back to last week to this week, there's just so much depth on this team. There's star power everywhere in the goal and offensively, defensively. They're incredible. And one of the things you hit on, like even winning a game in a, getting the 1 point, it feels almost like a letdown because of how good this team has been.
Oh, absolutely. And that I was talking to someone about that the other day. I said, if you were a different team and said, hey, we tied Wisconsin, I'm sure St. Cloud State was really happy to tie Wisconsin, get that point. But if you're Wisconsin, if you're the number one team, it almost is like a little letdown because you have even higher of an expectation to just win everything, win every time. You're the number one team in the country.
Yeah, let's talk about what's coming up next. So obviously there's 6 games left in this. I think it's 6, right? There's 6 games left in the season.
Yep, so 3 series, yep.
What's coming up next in the next week or two for the Badgers women's team?
Yeah, so they're playing Minnesota Duluth. That's tonight. And tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, January 31st, February 1st. Then they are going to play, and that's at Minnesota Duluth. They're going to play at home against Minnesota next weekend. So border battle, always exciting, always brings in a lot of fans and is just tons of fun. So that's near future for the Badgers.
I want to bring up this quote. This is from Mark Johnson. He's the women's coach. He said, and this time of the year, whether you're playing Duluth or Minnesota, it doesn't matter who you're playing to get into the playoffs. You're doing the little things. You got to do the little things right. You got to keep improving on those areas. It feels like almost like a Bill Belichick type of a statement. Like it doesn't, we're playing ourselves at this point because we have these teams down the stretch aren't great on the women's side, but you can tell they're still focused on how can we get better to make the title run. Is this title or bust for this team? Like if they don't win a championship this year, what's the level of disappointment?
Very high. So obviously the 2 powerhouses are Ohio State and Wisconsin. Ohio State wins last year against Wisconsin. Wisconsin wins the year prior against Ohio State. So it seems like not always, but recent years, especially with these 2 powerhouses, it comes down to those two teams. So I think it would be surprising for everyone if it didn't come down to Wisconsin and Ohio State. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of pressure on Wisconsin right now, given that, they have done pretty well against Ohio State. They had a game where they won 6-0. I mean, that's insane to think about.
What about I wanted to ask you this. I'm curious with the women's volleyball team, which are obviously not in season right now, but they're incredible. The home environments there are amazing. Women's hockey is incredible. What is if you had never been to any sport, you had never experienced sports, what is the most electric home sporting event right now at the University of Wisconsin? Is it volleyball? Is it hockey?
I'd say like each team would be playing like a pretty good team.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're getting like Friday night kind of vibe. I gotta go volleyball. I have to go volleyball. It is absolutely electric in there. I mean, I think it's a lot of students are starting to get like on that, understand that, but like some who don't, like you have to get out. Like I was explaining to my family back at home, like, no, like volleyball is a huge deal here. I know it's not a huge deal everywhere, but like Wisconsin volleyball is very huge, deservedly, because they're an excellent team.
And we're going to talk about them in a second, reloading in the portal. Is there any other sport that comes close to that right now? Because, listen, I love men's basketball. The Kohl Center men's basketball, it doesn't have that type of juice right now. Football team hasn't been great. Men's hockey, but they got to get a little bit better to get to that point. Is there anybody I'm missing, or already those teams deserve to be in that mix?
Yeah, I think men's hockey certainly is even, they've been doing okay. I shouldn't say they've been doing okay. Recently, they've been doing really well. On the season, they've been doing all right. Also, lots of youth, so there's other factors. But, yeah, they get a pretty big turnout. Women's hockey, huge turnout as well, which makes sense. But, yeah, I'd say those are the sports that maybe aren't covered as much, that are just so good, bringing in lots of fans.
We're going to take a quick second for our friends of the show. We're going to go back. We're going to talk about how the volleyball team has absolutely reloaded in the portal this offseason. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick second for our friends of the show. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is incredible. If you want to get to some of these events, you can do that on Gametime. Go find out, like, you get the cheapest tickets, the best inventory, a wide selection of different things. You can go to movies, concerts, sporting events, the theater. I have been to the theater. I went to a Broadway show. It was great. If I had known about Gametime, I would have done that and saved money to go see. I saw King Kong. It was absolutely incredible. But I've never been to a concert in my life, which is, I'm like, I have to do that. I'm going to get those tickets on Gametime. Right now, snag the tickets without the stress over on Gametime. You can get, you download the app, download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create the account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Get the tickets to the experiences that you're going to remember throughout your life over at Gametime. Let's jump back into this. Let's talk some volleyball. I also want to apologize. I'm a little under the weather, so my voice is a little hit or miss today. That's why we got Grace here. Grace is going to do the heavy lifting. I want to hit on volleyball for a little bit, because a couple really big portal additions that the volleyball team has made this offseason.
Yeah, and also just to say how crucial having these players come in is going to be, because you lose players like Sarah Franklin and Julia Orzel, not eligible to play, did their 5 years for Sarah Franklin. So you're losing these big time names, which just makes it so imperative to get these outside hitters. Got Grace Egan, very versatile, and she has 3 years left, which is very exciting. She totaled 10 or more kills in 9 matches this season, recorded a career-high 22 kills and 23 points at Wisconsin. So if you're following Badger volleyball, you'll remember that. And totaled 6 matches with 10 or more digs and had 4 double-doubles on the season. So she's going to be a great addition to the team. Also got Grace Lopez from Miami, 2 years left, 2-time NCAA big-time performer, ranked 9th in Miami history for most kills in a season to lead the ACC. Also has international experience, I should add. Most kills per set was 4.11. I think I said season. And then Mimi Coiler, another outside. This will be her last year, coming from Oregon. She was 4th in the Pac-12 for points per set, 4.43, and aces with 44 total. And she became the 22nd player in program history, that being Oregon program history, with 1,000 career kills as a junior. So lots of talent coming to Madison. Very exciting. Wisconsin certainly won in the means of the portal this year. So very exciting stuff for them.
Yeah, and I feel like obviously we do a lot of football recruiting coverage on this show, basketball recruiting too. I feel like this is how Alabama football fans feel, or Ohio State football fans feel during recruitment, when you're like, oh, we're going to pluck this player and this player, and you're really getting to pick out of the treasure chest. I mean, you look at a player like, and you mentioned it here, Mimi Culver from Oregon. She led the Ducks in kills every season she was there. You look at, like you mentioned, Grace Egan, she had 22 kills against Wisconsin last. Like, these are big time All-American level talent that you're just, at this point, that thing's just a factory. You're just feeding in talent and feeding out. And I can't wait for it next year.
Very excited as well. As huge as it was to lose players like Sarah Franklin, Julia Orzel, there's just so much talent coming in, and some experienced talent given they are coming from the transfer portal. So very excited to see it.
Let me ask you this big picture, and then we're going to get into men's hockey and women's basketball as well. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, these programs, women's hockey, volleyball, continue to have this level of success. What's the ceiling on these programs? I think we talk a lot about these programs should have more exposure because they're exciting. These athletes are incredible. They're winning. What's the next step for these programs?
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, and this sounds like a pretty generic answer, but a lot of it comes with time and the success. Obviously, success helps, but you've seen the Caitlin Clark effect and how women's basketball is building. And I think that's what these programs, you might not see it because it might not be this huge jump as was the Caitlin Clark effect, but they are making these little steps of progress. Certainly. I mean, if you looked at the field house 20 years ago, it wouldn't compare to the amount of fans today. So it is, I'm sure, very frustrating, especially if you're a fan of that team, never mind a player, but it is something that's just continuing to grow. And the more successful these teams are, and the more people will be like, hey, you should check this out. I was making my parents watch Wisconsin, Nebraska. I was explaining how big of a deal it was, word spread.
Yeah, I love it. It's just kind of a slow burn, but it's getting there. Let's talk men's hockey. So I think since the last time we talked, it's been a pretty good stretch for the men's hockey team.
Absolutely. And the thing that's interesting about this team is while their record might not show it, they're now 11, 12, and 3. This is not by any means a poor Badger team. And let me explain why. 12 of their games have been in overtime. 19 out of 26 of their games were decided by 1 goal or less. And as I mentioned, they have 12 losses, only 3 of which were decided by 2 or more goals. So this is a team that's winning close games, losing close games. Notice how I say close. This team is not getting absolutely killed by another team, losing by 6 goals. That is not happening. This is a young team. You have underclassmen that are leading the way, specifically Quinn Finley making strides for the program. He averages 7 points per game. You also have players that get time on the ice like Gavin Morrissey, Jack Phelan, Sawyer School. So there's a lot of youth on this team, which isn't bad, but it just means they're growing. So they recently played Michigan in the first game. Michigan was up 4-2 until 5:16 left on the clock in the second period, at which point Wisconsin stepped on the gas, scored 3 unanswered goals, ultimately winning 5-4. I mean, that game was electric, got all the fans in. It was at home, so in the Kohl Center. Second game in the series was the highest attended home game for the Badgers this season. Who knows if the game the day before helped. And they tied that one 4-4, lost in the shootout. But again, they still earned a point against number 10 Michigan. Should say they earned 4 points technically in the series. So huge for them.
Well, and to your point, both close. I think it's a great point. Both close games, so close loss to close win. But with a young team, that's going to be better as they get experience, as they continue to grow. Those close losses turn into close wins. And honestly, those close wins turn into 2 or 3 goal wins.
100%. And yeah, unfortunately, that is something that I think people lose sight of with all the NIL and transfer portals these days, where it's well, you're just going to transfer, you're going to transfer. But something that a lot of Badger teams recently, I should say men's basketball has done great with it, to reference players that they've built up, such as John Blackwell. Men's hockey is kind of doing the same thing, where they are keeping players young. Of course, you can't keep everyone, and you're going to have people come in. But just in a general rule, in today's day and age where transfer portals are like crazy, they're keeping these players that are young and developing them. And that's how I think people want it to be. That's how you want it to be if you're a fan of the team. So there's developing that needs to be done, but these players clearly have talent and can hang in with these top teams being like 18 years old. I mean, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Let's shift to women's basketball. So the last time we talked, women's basketball was in the middle of a pretty big losing streak in the Big Ten, and some of those games weren't that pretty. Came out and beat Michigan, a really big win to snap an 8-game conference losing streak. And you did that game, correct? You called that game?
Yes, I did.
Talk to me about that game. What was different for the Badgers basketball team in that game?
It was so exciting in the sense that Wisconsin often comes out hot, right? And they're tied or down by a few, maybe even up a few on a rare occasion at halftime. And then it just sinks after halftime. When they played Minnesota the other week, they were tied at halftime, ended up losing that game by like 25-30. Don't remember the exact number of points. And so this was a game where I was calling it, was great. Like halftime, they were like still very much in it. And, I wasn't going to say anything, but in the back of my head, it's, oh my gosh, are they going to like lose all this steam against Michigan, who, by the way, not ranked anymore, but they were 24 as of 2 weeks ago. Pretty bad loss to Michigan State, took them out of the ranks. But I just wanted to say that because this is not a bad Michigan team. So, yeah, I mentioned this last time, but they are playing 3 ranked teams in the remainder of the season, including 2 teams in the top 5, USC and UCLA. So it's not going to get any easier. But, yeah, they killed their 8-game losing streak against Michigan. They struggled with the 20 turnovers. However, they were excellent from deep. And by excellent, I mean they were 12 for 25, 48%. Junior Lily Cron's been getting more action recently. Put up 14 points, 12 of which from deep, and 5 total Badgers. I think this is really significant. Scored in double-digit figures, right? So this is there. Here you're starting to see the depth because everyone's Sarah Williams, excellent player. In fact, no surprises that she scored the most for her squad, right. 22 points. So never in any way to discredit Sarah Williams, but more just to say you can see the support she's getting around her, right? Like they lob the ball up to her and she has the height and she has the coordination. She'll like hit against the glass, get something to roll in. But you also have these players that are shooting threes, which I think is so significant because when you're doubling Sarah Williams, there's another player open that they're throwing the ball to, whether that be Lily Cron or Natalie Leisinger, and they're making their threes.
Well, that's very similar to the Badgers basketball team, right? The men's side where, Corral is a guy who's capable. Now, Sarah Williams is a better player in her sport than Corral is. She's a killer. She had 22 points in this last game. But the same kind of idea, if you double Corral, then you're going to have shooting opposite somewhere else. And Sarah Williams is a really good passer. When she gets doubled, she's able to find those shooters. She's a complete player. Great game by her, and great job to beat Michigan. Where does this team go from here? Because now you had this 8-game losing streak. You got this big-time conference win. The bottom 3 teams, if I'm correct, on the women's side, don't make the Big Ten tournament like the men's side. So is that the goal? You have to make this Big Ten tournament? Or what do you think for the rest of this season that goal is for this women's team?
I think that a lot of, I guess I'd say fans rather than the actual direct team are focused on this numerical measurement. You have to be at this rank, or you have to have this many wins. You have to be over 500. The women's team, historically, we talked about this last time, has not been great. So people are starting to get frustrated, saying like, oh, like we need this or that extreme example, but this team is not going to win the national championship. And I say that extreme example to just think like, you're thinking, yeah, of course, Grace, that's crazy. But you have to think about that to think, why is that crazy? Because they haven't been that good, and they haven't been that good. So even just little steps at getting better is incredible. And you saw how they did in the transfer portal as well. Carter McRae, also a player that's being doubled when Sarah Williams is subbing for her. Tess Myers. So they are making the right steps. Of course, it stinks when your team isn't just winning all the time, but that's not the reality of how it goes. This is a program that for a very, very long time has struggled. They've had seasons maybe like back 10 years ago where they were struggling to win more than like 5 games. Like you have to remember where you're starting from, and you can't expect a championship bound team. So I think we are doing the strides, and it's hard to measure this numerically and quantify how many wins they need when you're playing all different teams. I think it's looking more into the box score than just the outside final score.
Let me ask you this. I have a bit of a theory. We'll wrap up here. Again, always great having you on, Grace. Like, this is great insight, and it's really appreciated. Well, I think we've seen at Wisconsin, people support winning teams. Period. It doesn't matter. Like, women's volleyball we talked about it. Like, maybe the greatest sporting event you can go to at the University of Madison right now, or in Madison and University of Wisconsin right now. And women's hockey, if the women's basketball team does turn the corner and they start consistently making into tournament, making runs, this is a state that loves basketball. This is a state that loves, Wisconsin sports. I think people would rally around that team. I think it would be a really fun environment.
Oh, I completely agree. The men's soccer team, while they fell off eventually, they were I think up to number 8 this season in the country. Never that good. People started showing up, and it's I love soccer personally. So not in a bad way, but no one really ever shows up for soccer. People start piling in, lost a little bit of momentum and people started going back. But that's the thing. If a team's good, they're good. Women's hockey team gets a lot of people to shove in LeBron. They very well can get higher turnouts if they start turning the corner and finding more success.
What's coming up for them this week, Grace?
Women's basketball playing Purdue on Sunday. That is in 2 days. I had to do the quick math. Who hasn't won a game in conference yet. Again, Wisconsin's 2-8, so to not boast about their conference record either, but this is a point where they can really capitalize, get some reps in before they go and host USC, number 4. That's going to be a hard one. So yeah, it's good they're going to get the chance to have had that win against Michigan, hopefully build some nice reps against Purdue, see what they can put up against USC.
Yeah, it feels like that Purdue game's a big deal. Like, you can't beat Michigan and then have a drop off against Purdue with some of the beasts coming up, and not just like you mentioned. There's 3 of them, big ones coming up on the schedule. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Really do appreciate it as always. This is again something we're trying. I think it's great. I think Grace is incredible. So I think this is a lot of fun, and to explore some of the other sports that honestly deserve more coverage at the University of Wisconsin. So if you've been listening, thank you so much. Go check out Locked On Big Ten for all the biggest stories from the conference over on that side with realignment, NIL, and we will talk to you later on Wisconsin.